The U.S. Women's National Team dominated Italy to close out their 2025 in ways that I think show a lot of learnings from the past year and perhaps a preview of what we're hopefully going to see from the team in 2026. Welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Wednesday, December 3rd, and we're going to break down what we saw from the U.S. in 2 games against Italy into a couple of larger points that touch on the attack, midfield, defense, and a couple of tactical notes as well, because I think that opponents are going to have to start playing this team very differently if they're going to want to find success. Let's dig in. So the U.S. Women's National Team finished 2025 in a really good place, finished out the year strong. 2 pretty dominant wins over 2025 Euro semifinalist Italy. First game, 3-0, strong. 2 goals by Caterina Macario, with the opener by Olivia Moultrie. The second game, 2-0, goals by Macario and Jaden Shaw. You know, not going to underplay it. It was a really good window with combos that I think worked really well. A very good bounce back with some lessons learned from the window in which they lost that 1 game to Portugal. Showcased more, I think, of the team's promise for the future, even more than that Portugal immediate bounce back that we saw over the course of these 2 games, to hit on maybe some of these larger, big picture, both questions and answers of what's going to happen next year as they move into games that really, really matter. There's World Cup qualifying in November. It's going to be another wonky schedule with obviously the huge men's tournament in the summer. But I want to take some of these learnings from the last couple of windows and turn it into something that focuses a little bit more on what we're going to see next year. And so to start with the big headline, and I think this is one that you'll probably have seen from a variety of different coverage points this week, is that Caterina Macario is truly, really back. She is fully healthy, fully hitting on all cylinders. She's able to handle heavy minutes for club and for country for the first time, really, since she was able to come back from not only the ACL tear that she suffered, but also just some of those lingering injuries that kept her out of the Olympics in 2024. Macario has 5 goals in the last 3 U.S. Women's National Team games. She's been directly involved in 17 goals in her last 14 international appearances. She's finishing the year as the team's leading scorer. Now, Macario's injury history doesn't need to be belabored here, but this is something we talked about on this show in the past, that there's just sort of a cosmic injustice that some of her lowest points with injuries tend to come in these major tournament years, despite being an incredible talent for the U.S. Women's National Team for a number of years. She has never gotten a chance to really feature in a major tournament. As people know, she went as an alternate in Tokyo Olympics. She was not able to go to the 2023 Olympics, and she was not able, or so the 2023 World Cup, and she was not able to go to the 2024 Olympics either. And so she's emerging now in 2025, and we're starting to see that real Caterina Macario that can make a huge impact for this team if she can stay healthy through 2027. Emma Hayes sees it clearly as someone who recruited her for Chelsea and never got to benefit from the best Macario could offer at the club level before moving on to take on the U.S. Women's National Team job. And it's becoming obvious to a national audience as well. Her goal in the second match, that chip of the keeper, which she described after the game, she was like, I don't know what else I was supposed to do. The keeper was coming out. All you can do is chip her. That was classic Cat Macario. That was, she believes, 2022 Cat Macario. That was Champions League winner with Lyon, Cat Macario. Stanford Natty Champs, Cat Macario. And despite the fact that she has played games in the last couple of years, that audacity, that confidence, I think Hayes called it, getting her swagger back, is a little bit new in this new era of her career. And she told media this week that her greatest triumph this year has been her consistent availability. And I agree that that's been the final piece of the puzzle, because with more time on the field, we're starting to see that old sparkle come back for Macario. She's been great on dead balls. She's very good at dead ball delivery. She's increasingly available to start every match for a team waiting for Sophia Wilson's imminent return, which has been very important actually through these 2 windows where they're figuring out the midfield, figuring out the defense. Macario's consistent availability and her consistency has been really important for them. I really enjoyed seeing her start with Shaw in the second match. Happy to see that those 2 didn't really cancel each other out so much as played to each other's strengths. Those are 2 players that could get caught in the same spaces. They were not caught in the same spaces. They were able to work around each other. And right now she's undroppable. Macario has been incredible, and I think hopefully will continue to be, which creates some interesting tactical notes for the U.S. going into 2026. I anticipate Sophia Wilson being back sooner rather than later. People probably saw that she went down to Florida this week to go be with the team, to go let them meet her daughter, let them, kind of work her way back into sort of some of the ins and outs of a U.S. Women's National Team camp, despite not technically being in camp. I'm anticipating her back early next year. And when that happens, I'm very curious to see if Macario slots into that number 10 role as Wilson works her way back. They're suddenly very deep there again at the number 10 with really good performances from Rose Lavelle in this camp, Jaden Shaw, even Corey Bethune waiting in the wings. Does Wilson play wide again in that sort of newly favored 4-2-3-1 formation where they have maybe Macario up top? They have Wilson playmaking from wider spaces, cutting in a little bit more. We actually saw specifically, Alyssa Thompson do really well on that left side. We saw Olivia Moultrie actually do really well on that right side in the first game. They're trying these different shape things out. And I can't wait to see how that works when you have two players where you obviously want to get a player like Sophia Wilson back into the mix while also accommodating a player who is playing as well as Macario. Now, Macario is not a target 9. We know this. There were a couple balls over the top in these two games that she wasn't able to get on. She's not like that wide booted type player. That's not exactly what Hayes wants from her anyway. And so I do think there's a role for Wilson to play and for Macario to play. I think the question is that in alternatives with one another in terms of starting roles, especially when you get into tournament formats, or is it something where they're going to be on the pitch together? So that's an exciting question to have. And I'm sure the U.S. is incredibly excited to see Macario playing as well as she is. Second, I also thought the midfield combos were way better. I do wonder if we've seen the last of the Coffey, Heaps, Lavelle midfield, which possibly died a final death at the hands of Portugal during the last international window. This week, we saw Coffey, Claire Hutton, and Rose Lavelle, and then we saw Hutton, Lily Johannes, and Heaps. I'm not going to linger. This is not the show to linger on the perpetual question of Heaps' role in the second match or even just her role overall with the team on the pitch. I thought her off-ball movement and one-touch work was pretty good in the second match. I don't think that she was like an overall negative, particularly in that first half, because I think the World Cup is in 18 months, and I'm just not sure it matters too much at this moment. I was struck by the broadcast quoting Hayes as saying that good teams maybe ultimately pick themselves over time. That feels like maybe what's happening in the midfield naturally. I think there is going to be a watchful eye to see if that continues to progress in the midfield, but this was the step forward in terms of those combinations I think everyone has been looking for, especially getting a player like Hutton in with Coffey and Lavelle, who are both playing very well and played very well for club this year, or figuring out how Johannes works with Heaps or anything like that, just kind of figuring that out. But who I do want to focus on actually within those combinations is Claire Hutton, who got 2 starts in this international window and played really well. She's grown so much this year. She's an impressive young player. You would not know that she was a teenager, either when she's on the pitch or when she's speaking to media, that she's a star. Claire Hutton is a star, and that's only up from here. And I also want to kind of talk about her in conversation with a comment that we got on last week's YouTube video, which articulated some frustration in sort of my quick assessment of Jalen Howell coming back into camp as a more traditional defensive, defense forward midfield option. Not downplaying Hutton's contributions. That was not my intention. I think that's a fair critique, kind of sort of that quick hit, but let me sort of elaborate on that, because I think the blind spot is that I see some of these players incredibly differently, and I think that Hayes does too. Let's look at how Hutton was used in both of these games. First, again, she pairs with Coffey in that 4-2-3-1, those two defensive midfielders together. I liked this formation a lot for them in this game, supporting Lily Reel and Alyssa Thompson on the left, while finding distributive outlets through the spine of the midfield. I thought Hutton looked great in this first game, but the more important thing is she made Coffey look even better, which is going to be crucial for this team going forward as they continue to figure out that defensive midfield shape that isn't going to leave players on an island like we saw in that first game against Portugal. Second game, by nature of Heaps in there sort of running box to box, as we know she likes to do, Heaps loves to stretch the formation. Hutton did have in moments she had to operate a little bit more like a lone defensive midfielder, a lone number 6. I thought she combined well with Johannes, who was pitch perfect. Once again, she's incredible. And you saw Johannes get more involved in the attack. Italy sat off ball a lot in these 2 games. So Hutton's job was to regain possession. I thought she did a nice job of that. And I also just thought her distributive work without having quite as much of a set formation in the second game was a little bit more individual, but also, as we saw, they were finding each other in a really nice way. I think we saw a lot of shades of what she can do. And I think that's my thing with Hutton is that she's probably never going to be the one player that we talk about as like Hutton is the number 6 or Hutton is the number 8. But I think that's her superpower, her versatility and spatial awareness with her midfield teammates. She's been through the lone number 6 gauntlet, and she swims more often than she sinks. She does a nice job when she's asked to do that. But the way, like, for example, Hutton and Johannes recycled possession in the second game against Portugal in relationship to each other really impressed me. I thought Hutton's quiet support of Coffee in Italy game 1 was very, very impressive. Her ability to hold down the fort behind Johannes in game 2 while Heaps was trying to find different spaces and pull defenders to open up space, which actually I thought worked really well. She's remarkably adept at fitting, not necessarily into different midfield structures, because I think ultimately the U.S. is trying to create the same structure every time. Execution is maybe the question mark. But she's also, when she's seeing her creative teammates start those ideas, pull defenders, move into space, see different runners in front of them, go out wide. Like there's just a lot, we saw a lot of versatility in that attack in these 2 games. She's responding not just to what she's been told by the coaches, but by what she's seeing from her teammates. And she's able to do that really quickly. And she has already improved so much this year as a very, very young player. So it's true. I don't see her as like for Howell, because Howell, in my opinion, is a player that you either have to pair with a truly possession-oriented DM. Like, for example, I think Hutton would make Howell look great. I think Howell and Hutton would actually work really well together. Or you let her, like a player like Howell, kind of roam on her own as a more punishing presence, a defensive presence in front of the center backs, where you're kind of saying we're setting up our triangle of defense here and then establishing what's happening in front of that. That approach also has its own merit. But again, we've seen the best of what the U.S. can be with the level of nuance that Hutton is bringing to what is essentially a supporting role. And she's crushing it. She's been so good. And she was, talking after the second game about wanting to get involved in the attack a little bit more. And that's the next step, especially when you're playing a team like Italy that sat off ball as often as they did. So, loved the midfield. I like these combos. I think that they're doing a good job of mixing in veterans and young players. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of those combinations as the year progresses next year. It's like I said, good teams pick themselves. We're seeing it work itself out. We're seeing shades from these young players that I mean, people can't stop raving about it, right? That we haven't seen in the U.S. midfield as a unit in some time. Let's talk about the defense for a second. I think this headline here is like a little bit obvious, but let me kind of, again, elaborate. Naomi Girma was back in this team, and she started both games. She didn't play the entirety of the second match, but when she slots in to the U.S. defense, it just makes the project as an entirety make sense, which is not just to say that Girma is the best defender in the world, but I think that she is. But we also have seen how the unit around her stabilizes when she gets slotted into the center back pairings, the way she relates to the outside backs, to her goalkeeper. It's like she is so good that we are not just watching her like win 1v1, which of course we were. She had a great defensive stop on an Italy breakaway in the first game, but just you're like, oh, I understand where the U.S. is going with this once they put their best player in. Love seeing Jordan Bugg and Girma get time together in game 2. I think Lily Reel on the left is starting to put some clamps on that starting role at left back. I'm curious to see if maybe she starts getting more back-to-back reps in that role alongside on the opposite side of Emily Fox, who, as we know, is kind of that steady presence on the right. I think Reel gets better with every game. I think she came out of that Gotham championship win with a lot of confidence and played really well in game 1. We saw goalkeeper Claudia Dickey have 2 very good games in goal in this window. I said, I think we're going to get a lot of Dickey in this window, and this is her opportunity to really show something. And I think that she did. She didn't have a ton to do, but I thought what she did was really nice. I think the U.S. has 2 very solid options right now for that starting goalkeeper role in a fashion that I'm sure makes Hayes very happy. That was the ultimate goal of like the goalkeeper battle is you want multiple good options. You want strengths. You want weaknesses. You want players who can go when, for example, Fallon Joyce suffers a freak accident in a game. You need a different goalkeeper that can go. I think the confidence we're seeing from Dickey is greater than I think we have seen from a U.S. quote-unquote backup in a very long time. There were costs to the dichotomy of the way the U.S. has done the goalkeeper position in the past, where you had Nair as like ultimate number 1, and before her, Hope Solo as ultimate number 1, where sometimes you had some other keepers come in and you could see the mental toll of feeling like this is my one chance. I haven't got a lot of experience with this back line. That was a little bit crushing at times. I think both Joyce and Dickey, and this is a credit to Hayes, who I think does a good job of placing expectations without placing unnecessarily pressure on these players. is that she looked really comfortable against a good team. And I think that we're going to see that push-pull of Dickey and Fallon Tillis-Joyce going into 2026. Neither player is like the best at playing out of the back. That's like not their number one strength. But I also think that the U.S. is prioritizing the right things: shot stopping, defensive organization. Dickey, as we saw in game 2, has a long ball that she can drop on a dime, and underrated, she can throw that thing. So if you need to get a quick counter, if you need to move the ball quickly, not only can she drop that in with her foot, she can do it with her arm too. She reminds me, Dickey, I saw shades of this, and I don't mean this in like a she's where Alyssa Nair got to, but she reminds me a lot of a young Alyssa Nair, or a younger Alyssa Nair, especially when she was walking into that number 1 role for the first time with the U.S. I saw a lot of Nair. I have seen a lot of Nair as someone based in Chicago. She used to be really uncomfortable with the ball at her feet for a very long time. There were a lot of punts out of bounds. There was a lot of kind of not knowing what to do in space. There was a lot of trying to figure out how to, figure out what length of pass you want to send out depending on what the other team is giving you and your own shape. And then it started to click for her. And the U.S. always prioritized with Nair, which is that she's going to make the save, and then the rest will come. And I think they're prioritizing the right things with Dickey and Tillis-Joyce in that same vein. I'm sure Tillis-Joyce was bummed to miss this one for, like I said, kind of a freak accident, freak injury. It did open up some more competition to come in 2026, but that's only good for the environment. There are still some question marks, though, I want to say, on the defensive side, despite the fact that they got 2 clean sheets, which I know they were very proud of. Obviously, they were not able to achieve that in either game against Portugal. Italy still had a free header or two. There was a moment in the first game where they had a runner that got completely lost on a defensive set piece. If they had executed a little bit better, maybe that turns into a goal. Set piece defending was still a little bit soft. There were opportunities left on the board that Italy just simply couldn't take advantage of. The aerial duels thing perplexes me, and it's been a problem for at least the last 6 months. I don't completely understand why that's become such an issue defensively for the U.S., but it's unlike them. I don't know if it's like a player profile issue, if it's a little height issue, communication, experience, whatever that ends up being. But Hayes mentioned it on Monday, and I remember the broadcast being like, they're playing so well and she's worried about aerial duels. And I'm like, I don't know, the aerial duels haven't been great, and they haven't been great for a minute. And so I'm really curious to see what you end up doing to fix that, whether, again, it is just experience at the international level or encouraging players to be a little bit more intentional about what they're doing when the ball is in the air, because it is true that is still has been a big problem for them, despite the fact that Italy wasn't able to capitalize. But the point is that maybe from that Portugal series to this series, it's not great that the U.S. has to rely so much on one player like Naomi Girma to make it all make sense. But that's what happens when you have a world-class, all-time generational talent. And I don't think the U.S. is going to apologize for that either. They're getting closer to finding her center back partner. I think Bug clearly looks like maybe the heir apparent if she can get more time. I don't want to discount what Emily Sonnet did in game 1 and kind of the fall that she's having. She was incredibly good for Gotham, really, really good for her club team, taking them to a championship. She looked really good with Irma by her side too. I wonder if there's any hope for a return from Tierna Davidson, but they're getting there. You're seeing the vision. And I agreed, again, with Lily Reel, maybe over Patterson in game 1. I thought Kate Wiesner did just fine in game 2. And I think the OB question is starting to work itself out as well. So the defense is still a little bit more of a work in progress. And there were some question marks, but you see where it's going. Whereas, again, in the last couple of windows, maybe you're like, I'm not entirely sure what this is. And the answer is this is a defense anchored by Naomi Girma. And then fully just taking over into 2026. This is less about the team because we've talked a lot about the U.S. Women's National Team in the last couple of months, and we'll continue to do so probably before the year is out. But I had one other main takeaway, I think, looking at the losses this year in the context of this Italy window, where I just don't think that Italy got the game plan quite right. It's a suggestion and a warning to the U.S. opponents in the near and probably far future. You can't win games by bunkering against this team. You just can't. This Emma Hayes U.S. Women's National Team can't bunker against them. They're going to find that space. They're going to find that breakthrough. They have really creative players on the ball. They are comfortable in possession in a way that they have not been, and certainly were not under Vlatko and Anovsky. All 3 of the U.S.'s losses this year came to teams who played them straight up, packed midfield numbers, and were confident with the physicality and speed and tempo of the game. Japan's shape was impenetrable early in the year. Brazil ran all over that young roster before, the U.S. bounced back. And Portugal packed the midfield to make a vulnerable midfield trio play harder soccer than they needed to. Italy didn't do any of this. They sat off ball. They lost duels on the ground. They didn't really have a sense of tempo or timing where the tackles were coming from. It was too easy to dispossess them. They let good attacks slip away when contested, fell into a really conservative shape. These are all things that in the past might have actually disrupted the United States. And again, especially if you're looking at that era of like 2023 specifically. But I don't know, that after a year of casting a really wide net to put this player pool together, when this young group under Emma Hayes smells blood, they're not going to let you get away. And that, I think, is what we talk about with the mentality. So maybe the new U.S. mentality where it's at right now, as some of these young players get experience, is it's not that you can't shove them to the ground and bully them a little bit and make them think about their spacing and where they want the ball to go and how they want to move the tempo and how they want to avoid turnovers. You can, I mean, they talked about that in the Portugal game, right? They were really upset that they let themselves get bullied in that midfield. But you can't let them run out of ideas, because they're not going to. They're going to find that space. If they see you concede, even mentally, for 1 second, they're going to take that shot. And in many ways, their greatest limitations at this point simply come from being young and inexperienced. The hope is that they're no longer going to be able to play them straight up and beat them either. So the word to all the U.S. opponents next year and beyond, if you want to beat the U.S., you have to be brave. You have to beat them at their own game. You have to push the midfield around. You got to win aerial duels. You have to win set pieces. There are still weaknesses to be exploited until, as the U.S. hopes, that they won't be exploitable anymore. So I am going to be so interested to see if opponents can hold that line next year, play tough, because you can't bunker. You can't bunker. You cannot give an inch, because they're going to take a mile. And no matter what, the thing I like about that is it makes for really, really good football. So I'm excited to see what this team's going to do in 2026. Good window to close out. More to come, I'm sure.
The Late Sub is part of the Just Women Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women Sports newsletter and follow Just Women Sports across all your favorite channels.